again. This is Grant Swartzwelder, and welcome to another episode of The Grown Up Table. You know, when you host your own podcast, you can come up with whatever topics you want to talk about. And this one, at the very surface, might seem a little strange because when you talk about conversations on life and character, at the first thought, it doesn't sound like it really fits. But our topic of branding, and especially when you focus on corporate branding, really does have a lot of direct contact to discussions on conversations on life and character. Because really, when you're branding a corporation, you're also branding yourself, your reputation, and seeing how those things connect are really, really interesting. You know, when you start thinking about branding, you can look at a variety of companies and how well they've done. Apple, for example, there's an example of a company that sells a lot of product, but has been able to maintain a very high premium type of brand and sells their products really high. You have others like Caterpillar, who's really known for a high level of industrial value. But then on the flip side, you also have negative brand consequences, like, for example, Enron, the smartest people in the room, except they happen to be cheating, and the brand was destroyed. You also have Boeing, talk about safety, and then they end up having wrecks and a lot of issues on the safety side. The brand gets destroyed there. So really, how you create your brand, maintain the brand, but potentially destroy your brand is so important, not only for companies, but again, for the individual. And what we're going to try to do with our guest today is to talk about how to create your brand and how it can potentially be destroyed, or how you need to maintain it to maximize that. To talk about that, I am so excited to have Eric Bierbrier, who has so many years of experience in branding with some of the most identifiable brands in the Dallas area: Container Store, Brinker, which, as we all know, is Chili's, Neiman Marcus. These are folks that have created a huge brand within the Dallas area and obviously globally for so many of them. Eric is the founder and CEO of EBMD, which is a branding and a growth strategy company. A host of experience with those companies and others. And so I've just been excited to hear what you have to say on this subject and to talk about branding and how it relates to individuals' lives. So Eric, welcome.
Thank you.
And so why don't we just start off with a big softball question about explain what branding is in your eyes and the value of branding.
Sure. I mean, as a native Texan, one would think about the King Ranch as an example of maybe the oldest brand that we kind of know and kind of love, if you will. Their brand was really about marking their cattle so that they had ownership. But above that, they also had to figure out how to make that part of their process. And we'll talk today about process and discipline. But the brand was really founded on the organic land grants of the 1894, right? And so they had this cattle. How would they protect it? And then second to that, how would they market it? So branding and marketing are intertwined. And when you look it up in the dictionary or in AI, it talks about one leading the other. But really, they're both imperative on how people move from organic to sort of a corporate mandate on things that they want to share with their consumers, share with their media partners, and share with, most importantly, their stakeholders.
So you've worked with a variety of startups. I think several of these companies I've mentioned, you were there at the very beginning. So how do you kind of just create that brand? How do you figure out what your brand should be? And then how do you make it a reality?
Yeah, so, having the right people in the room, and that's been used in business books forever and ever, but having different personalities bring their strengths and differences to conversations. I've worked on brands that were very organic, that started with a simple idea. The Container Store was one of those that we saw all these wonderful products, but no one could find or access them to then go and sell them. Contrast that to a brand like Federal Express. Everyone uses that word, we'll FedEx it, but that really meant different things to different people. Initially, it was a cargo opportunity to move packages quickly. And it became a vernacular, almost like a noun in business circles. Well, you know it's going to get there, and it'll get there tomorrow or the next day. So there was that trusted choice that they were able to develop over a long period of time. It didn't happen in a boardroom on day one. That was more of an organic kind of story arc, if you will.
So talk about how that happens organically, because obviously you're not just sitting it out there and hoping it goes. You've got to work that brand, work that product to make sure that people understand that FedEx means FedEx, or Xerox or Coke or any of those brands are what they're identified for.
Sure, but at the end of the day, I think all brands solve problems for people. If you're missing something in your life, you would then seek out an opportunity, a company, a partner, a consultant.
Now, is that a brand or is that a product?
Well,
the product solves.
The product solves the problem, but the company has to have the wherewithal to be able to deliver on that product and that promise. I'll use an example of groceries. In Texas, we have some of the best grocery chains.
Yeah.
And they all did the same thing. They had deli counters and they had fresh produce. But it took someone like Phil Romano, creating Eatsies, to say, well, we could do something bigger and better. In fact, it was smaller and it was more defined. But that idea came from Phil's travels around the world.
What do you mean smaller and well-defined?
Well, it didn't need to be 150,000 square feet.
Oh, the actual footprint of the Eatsies. Okay.
Right. So how do you make something that's social, neighborhood, affordable, and accessible? Our first Eatsies was at the corner of Lemon and Oak Lawn.
Right.
A very
Still
high
there.
density building. It's still there 30 plus years later. And he called it a social experiment. No one had ever done that. No one had ever said, I'm going to have the butcher, the baker, and the candle maker under one roof. But he went beyond that, and he challenged the industry to say, this is where the consumer is going. I see it, and I'm going to make it happen.
Well, and when you say it's a kind of a community or social, it seems like branding, if you can make it something that the customer or the person really feels and understands, that's when you've captured the real brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about consumer brands, I'll switch over to a childhood brand that I see all the time, and it's Lego.
Sure.
You know, Lego was a toy that they were able to develop that was simple, it was safe, it was affordable, but it allowed a child and their parents to kind of create a thing that wasn't there before. Unlike some toys that have a manual on step A through B, that's what I would refer to as a corporate brand, right? Something like Lego, something like a running shoe, like a Nike, you know, where people were starting to jog. I hate to use that word because it sort of ages us, but they were designed for athletes and then moved into that whole lifestyle, right? Nike now has turned into a swoosh, but it has evolved over the years. And I think great brands are organic, and you have to continuously feed them. You have to kind of find new markets for yourself and have, again, a core user, you know, the 2 or 3 customers, if you will, customer segmentation that makes sense.
Well, that point you made about maintain, and that's something that really interests me about, because the world evolves, whether it's COVID or internet or social media, things where the challenges on your product, your brand changes. And how do you maintain your brand, or how do you evolve the brand to handle the differences either in your marketplace or in how it's received in the public?
Yeah, and that's a great question. You hear it every week, a brand taking a huge leap forward or backwards. And I don't need to kind of bring up specific brands, but I think obviously shareholders, the people that are actually kind of cashing the checks or writing the checks, have influenced brands probably more than we would like to see as a branding expert. However, your customers don't really know what the future looks like. So there's a balancing act between what you should be doing to continue to grow and what you should have guardrails, kind of the white lines, if you will, on a football field, that say, this really isn't our core competency. It doesn't work. And so perhaps we need to kind of step back and focus on the 80% that's really driving our business. I use an example. Are people willing to drive past 2 or 3 of your competitors to come to you?
Sure.
Is there something special that you're doing? Is it your staff? Is it your products, your promotions, right? The fundamentals. But more importantly, they have their head and their heart aligned with what you do. And oftentimes it's a founder mentality. I remember when so-and-so was in the building,
Right.
right? Bob's Chop House here in Dallas.
Sure.
There's 20 or 30 of them within steakhouses within 5-mile
But you had
radius.
Bob that was there every night.
He was there, yeah. You think about other brands that are kin to your heart, your favorite Mexican restaurant. You may drive by 4 others to get there because they have your wife's favorite margarita. So there's a lot of subjective and a lot of objective pieces that go into it. I like to say it's sort of like when your gut knows, your gut knows.
Now, a second ago, you said you don't want to bring the name up, but it's my podcast, so I'm going to bring some names up. Let's talk Brinker and Chili's, because at one point, they were probably the best casual dining. And then I'd argue that they kind of lost their way. They kind of added more to the menu. They kind of lost touch with their clients in a way. And please correct me and bounce back. And now over the last several years, I see them kind of simplifying their menu again and really improving quality. And it seems like they've gone back to the Chili's that I remember from 15, 20 years ago. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're one of many examples of restaurants that when you do your focus groups and you're sitting in a room with people that don't really have a whole lot of stake in it, will guide you oftentimes in the wrong direction. Chili started off as a hand margarita. There were no knives and forks in the original Chili's.
I didn't know
Believe
that.
that?
Yeah.
It was simple. And so what I think they've done is over 40 or 50 years have realized that perhaps knives and forks and 20-minute ticket times and fajitas aren't really what their core customers are driving for, talking to their friends about, meeting up on a Thursday night. They've done a really good job of simplifying for burgers, appetizers, and margaritas.
So to bring it back to this whole brand, to me, it kind of confused the brand that people thought of Chili's as X, but then they added all this other stuff and kind of complicated the menu, and then it, in my mind, confused the client with what they really, the niche that they're trying to fill.
Yeah, Grant, we want to be all things to all people. We want to have the breakfast segment. We want to have the lunch segment.
You would love that.
You just can't do that.
Yep.
In my experiences, people say, I don't go there for lunch. I go to Starbucks for breakfast. Even if they had a lunch menu, they tried to serve wine in the evenings and bring in music. And at the end of the day, they said, we're not interested in going to Starbucks. We love your brand. It's not like we don't. It's just not part of our short list of places that we're going to get in a car and drive to. An interesting anecdote to that, we did a research study many years ago, and people would say, oftentimes we get in the car to go for dinner and we have no destination. We drive to an area. It goes back to hunting and gathering. And then it has to do with editing. And this is where a lot of the restaurant chains got into a problem. Because you had 2 kids in the back seat, you had your mother and your mother-in-law and your wife.
Well, there's your problem right there.
Well, it's a big car.
Oh, okay.
And they
Maybe
said,
not big enough, but
and then
that's
they
a
said,
whole nother podcast.
Yeah, we needed salads. And of course we needed desserts. And yeah, it ended up being the 900-page gorilla. And it took forever for the server to get the order in the kitchen, and the ticket times went up, and all the fundamentals that made
when you're talking about that, Cheesecake Factory comes to mind, where it's like this huge book. And then I go, how can you be good at making Chinese food, Mexican food, and all the other foods? It kind of seems to work against you as far as the perception of quality?
When you're the leader, you can do that. Is there someone else in this industry, in this big country, that can do that successfully day in, day out? No one. And so they have the ability to say, if you want to have that experience and it's going to be $50 a person, it doesn't feel like it's going to be that much, but a $12 piece of cheesecake for everyone at the table doesn't,
adds up.
It doesn't, end up being a low guest check. And the restaurant business is fickle. I always said that most restaurants should sign a 7-year lease and then figure out what to put in there for the next 7 years. And I know that's an expensive kind of business proposition, and every finance guy that you run that by goes, that's not going to happen. But people's ability to stay loyal in a city like Dallas in particular, have it top of mind for that long, because we are finicky and we do love new things, right? We love new menu items. We love new decor. And then have your servers, stay with you. How many restaurants do you visit, Grant? That the same restaurant, the same employees have been at that restaurant for 15 or 20 years. They're few and far between.
Very much so.
Unlike your companies, where people stay 15 and 20 years. So restaurants are difficult to be profitable, but when they are, people love them. There's a love-hate relationship with some, and social media has kind of, I would say in many ways, hurt restaurants' reputations. It used to be you and I talking about where you went for dinner, where you took your daughter for graduation. And now you have to rely on 62 different emails or posts and Instagrams that perhaps may not have ever been there. So the third party and the fourth party and whatever else is out there these days really impact a marketer's ability to stay focused.
We talked about Brinker and the challenge to maintain and evolve. The other one I wanted to bring up is Neiman Marcus. Yeah. And now that seems to be they were known for luxury, and they created a kind of a Texas luxury. And then they got bought and had debt. And so they had all of these kind of pressure points put on them. Management kind of changed. And so you have external conditions that can affect your brand or your operation. And speak to that as to how do you manage through that?
Well, again, the brand essence was about personal service. Personal service was my late mother-in-law going in and being able to buy all her Christmas gifts from one person. It was a big store, but there was that ability to say, Margaret's going to help me today. And I don't think price was an option, right? It wasn't a deterrent for her going in there. What happens when you have 22 stores and now you have 22 general managers and 16 buyers filling up departments is everyone has a job description. So you're not hiring people not to do their jobs. But I think the messaging, the hiring, the selection, it gets diffused in a way where people said,
sure,
I used to be able to go in that store and Margaret would find me. And now they discontinued that line. They made it where it's not available in my market. And that's really kind of a blessing and a curse. When you think about big corporations, the best ones are the smallest thinking, meaning that they have small groups working together and they have finite lines of engagement. You would never see someone, at a restaurant deciding that they have a cousin that sells chickens or eggs and we're going to go buy them.
Right.
Right? Because, he's my cousin. I want to help him out. So you have these boardrooms, you have departments, you have budgets, you have all types of regulation that oftentimes take a really kind of small brand and make it much more complicated for them to operate. And I think the brands that go, we get that. That's just kind of the noise. What is it that we do well? What are the 20% of the things that we do day in, day out, shift in, shift out? Something like FedEx. You go to a FedEx store, it's always transactional, but you feel like you're trusted in them with that package to get somewhere. And if you're taking it to FedEx, it's got to be important. Otherwise, you would have taken it to the Postal Service for 30% less.
And it seems like the challenge for both Brinker and Neiman Marcus was they were early leaders in their area, the luxury side, the casual dining, and then the explosion of competition in those areas. And we as individuals, we have, quote, competition where we have a lot of other companies and people out. Is being able to respond to that competition or that clutter outside seems like that's really a challenge for maintaining your brand and maintaining your awareness of your brand in the marketplace.
Yeah, I would say it goes back to a founder's mentality, and you can kind of look across industries. You mentioned Caterpillar, you mentioned John Deere, you mentioned other. I think any business that continues to have a founder's mentality. I had a chance to sit down with founder of Southwest Airlines many years ago.
Okay.
And he said, we only really do one thing. We help get people from point A to point B, right? That is the most important thing of their day. If we mess that up, they're going to miss that meeting. They're going to miss their granddaughter's afternoon recital. He said, so we've got to be really, really good at welcoming them in, moving them forward, right? And those are the functionalities. I mentioned to you when we were talking early on about Stanley Marcus one day picking up a piece of paper as he walked through a hallway.
Yeah, I like that story. Please tell that.
Yeah, and I said, your name is on the building. And he said, Eric, if I don't pick it up, how could I expect anyone else to pick it up? Mm-hmm. And he was absolutely right. Behaviors, ask other people to follow suit.
I've always been a believer in that if I'm not willing, I own the company, but if I'm not willing to make the copies or do some of the dirty work, why would other people think that they'd have to do it? That if they see me do it, then they really have no reason not to do it.
Sure. Yeah, I look at a brand like Starbucks. Started off really with a passion for creating a place. And again, you think about all the key foundational points that Howard Schultz kind of put down on paper. He wanted to have something that all employees had access to healthcare. His father had worked in New York and never had healthcare, and it worried him to death. He wanted to have something like he had experienced in Italy, where people sat around and talked, right, with coffee as sort of the social lubricant, right? It wasn't about speed of service. That was important as they grew, but it really was about that. And then he wanted to have a quality product that people really felt like it was worth spending an extra $1 or $4 or $6, right?
But there's an example. Do you think Starbucks is losing their way, or are they trying to find it? Because a year ago, they announced that you need to buy something to come in there and sit. And so they're putting kind of restrictions on that community in a way. Are they losing that initial value that they had?
Well, I think they lost it, and I think their new leadership, led by Brian, is really kind of focusing on the things that he can make short-term impact and long-term financial. And it's a teeter-totter.
And a little bit like Brinker, it also seems like they're reducing their menu, trying to focus back on what they were known for.
Yeah, absolutely. And putting your guest name on the cup. It seems simple.
Touch.
It seemed simple at the beginning, but it was unique and differentiated. And then they went away from it. They put a piece of paper on it and maybe a sticker.
Yep.
Right? So they lost that personal touch.
Very corporate, very sterile to have the little pre-printed sticker on there.
Anyone can do that.
Yep.
Anyone can do that. And so you've lost that competitive. And I'll take that one step further and say that emotional edge that made someone coming to Starbucks feel special. Grant, your triple mocha latte, with extra foam is ready, right? When you just yell out 234, and I have to look at a piece of paper from 5 minutes ago, you're not really dealing with Eric.
Yeah, you're not helping the experience. You're just trying to make money.
Yeah.
It seems like at that point.
Sure.
So this all kind of fits with the next part of this discussion of brand is kind of the destruction of brand. And, I've seen it from external factors. just bad decisions. One of the best examples I've thought of is like Lance Armstrong, who had this great brand, but then successfully just killed it because of some lying and some other issues, and just destroyed his brand. And so some of that, Enron is another example where it's just ethics and illegal type things that cause it. But there's bound to be other things that cause that brand. And again, bring it down to a personal level, your reputation. How does that get affected with the decisions, and what are some of the things that you've seen in your long history that have affected that?
Well, I think there's three things. There's obviously the perception of the brand, and you mentioned two, that you could kind of you go to the internet and find 50 brands.
Yep.
And that oftentimes stems from either a individual finance operations who decided that the company needs to move that way, and I've got, the coat of many colors, and you're going to follow my lead. And then there are other times where investors, board of directors, get in the way. A good example is I was in a meeting one time, and one of the young financial guys from a venture capital said, "I don't know why you have to have all those fresh flowers in the restaurant every night. It seemed like a $1 million thing. Can't we get
Put some plastic in there.
Put the plastic ones in there?" And you know what happens? Plastic ones then become cheaper cheese. It becomes where you don't have opera singers anymore on the weekends. The wine service kind of goes from the all-you-can-drink kind of honor system. Your pasta is no longer made in-house. You're sourcing, things to third-party vendors who perhaps weren't really as good as. And then most importantly, your staff members go, "It's not the same place. I was hired here." And so they become then the voice or the message of change. And whether
so
they're
that lack of focus on detail, it could definitely be a profit-driven issue. It could also just be complacency, or it's leadership not demanding.
I think people, again, have job descriptions, and in their mind, they have made a good decision. Saving $1 million on flowers is a good decision for a purchasing agent in a high-rise, 16 miles away from your nearest restaurant.
And I think that's a key point, that it seems like a lot of decisions are made without ever going into the store or into the parking lot or flying the plane and seeing what the real experience is and what that decision you're making, what effect that really has.
Well, I mean, you can go on and on. I'll use an example. The late Norman Brinker once told me, go stand in the parking lot and ask people how far they drove to get here.
Yep. That'll tell you.
We had maps. We had helicopter surveys. We had all these surveys of where to go to the next restaurant. But when you wrote down 75224, you knew that they drove 16 miles. You didn't have to go over and fly over rooftops and look at the next developer. So those are two examples, Grant, of, who are your core, I'll call them in your personal life, your sort of gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. But I've always been a believer, and I've had an opportunity to work in big corporate America, where one of the teachable points of view was to have a cross-functional team. And a cross-functional team didn't have a leader. It had an organizer. But the organizer helped define, if you will, what the struggles were, what the opportunities were, and using process and discipline, but having all those voices around a table, not a committee table, but people that actually had access to your customers, to the back door, if you will, in a restaurant, to the cash register in a retail concept.
And it seems like with any of these type decisions that we alluded to, you've got to have some guardrails to make sure that they don't start buying plastic flowers. And usually that's a visionary. Obviously, you've been around some great ones, Norman Brinker and Stanley Marcus and the such. But hopefully it's that CEO. Otherwise, it needs to be the board of directors saying, you're losing focus here. And then I also look from a reputational standpoint, a personal standpoint, whether those guardrails are the parents or the schools or whatever, but you've got to, hopefully you have someone that's keeping you kind of honest to what the vision is for your life, your product, your company.
Yeah, I think faith has a lot to do with that. And, you talk about finding the right people to put on your team. As an ex-hockey player, I always wanted to be on the team. I was a left winger, so there were only 4 positions, 4 lines on a hockey team, and 3 if you are a smaller team. But you were part of a bigger organization, if you will. I think ands and ors are something that we need to teach.
Say that again?
Ands and ors.
Okay.
The power of and is much more impactful. We can do this, and we can do this.
Okay.
Do they fit? Pieces of the puzzle. Or is sort of the opposite of that. You can have a piece of candy, or you can have a piece of cake, right? Should you have both at the same time? Probably not. But the power of and is what makes great companies kind of function. We can do that, and we can do that, and the end result is something bigger and better. So it's not a dismissive type of thinking. You mentioned guardrails. You watch sports all the time. Each sport has a game of rules. You can't step out of bounds before catching the ball. You can't be offside in hockey. You can't knock someone over in soccer, right? So there are finite rules within the lines of the playing field. But we use other things in sports, especially in training, called metrics. And we don't use enough metrics that matter in business or in your personal life or in your personal brand.
No, and that's a perfect point, that because another issue talks about that I think about is self-evaluation and being able to evolve. And the best way to know how to evolve is that metrics, understanding what's happening to you, your brand, your company. So how do you get those metrics? How do you get that analytics so that you know what to do? And it can be obviously softer. It doesn't have to be in your personal life a hard series of numbers, I guess. But how do you get that data that you can then evolve appropriately? Well,
you think about getting in a car, getting on a boat, getting on an airplane. There are multiple things that could go wrong, but the 4 things that most cars, most planes, boats have: a starter, right? It moves kind of the engine or something forward. So What does the dashboard look like? What are the key indicators that you need to look at every day that will allow you to kind of move your life forward, or be a good parent, or be a good employer or employee? Part of it is seeing the big picture. The higher you move up in an organization, they're not paying you to move the product from the front door to the back door, or change the wheel on an airplane at Love Field, right? They're looking at vision. And I was blessed to have worked for several coaches, mentors. One explained the 30,000, 3,000, 3-foot rule, right? Leaders lead with vision. Managers, directors lead from the middle. So as an example, the pilot gets the plane up to 30,000 feet. You look out the window and you go, we're going somewhere. Right. And I'll be there in 4 hours, and I'll have my meeting. The flight attendants, the people, the mechanics that are taking care of the plane, they're 3,000 feet. 3,000 feet says, we're getting you there safely. We're going to feed you. We're going to get your bags off it. And then once you're on the ground, it's like, now we're ready to go. We've gotten from A to B and from B to C. So having process and discipline, even in that simplest context, really has helped me. So what am I trying to accomplish?
That's not just corporate branding and corporate business. That's individual too. Again, the connection between all this.
1, 2, and 3, the simplest kind of measures, if you will.
Right.
Right. No one ever says, I'm going to start at 7, and then I'm going to move to, you buy something on IKEA, you better not start at 7. You better read those instructions. Right. So there's a reason for process. And I think we can use that both in our personal and our professional careers.
Yeah, when you were talking, I thought of a book, Make Your Bed by Admiral McRaven, who was formerly president of University of Texas. And one of the first stories was he gets up in the morning and he makes his bed. He does something productive from the very beginning, and then he gets started. And that seems to align with what you're saying, where you have a first step to take to make sure that brand is out there and you're generating kind of your brand in the marketplace.
Yeah, and you can use that for business. I use it for my personal deal. I get out of bed and put my feet on the floor and make sure that, I can stand up.
There you go.
My health is number one. Number two is my faith. So before I do anything for the day, I read my word. I read what it is that helps me put a little bit of context on what I can do today for myself and for others, right? And then I kind of move through the day. But at least I have two foundational pieces, my 2 feet and my faith and my health.
That's a good start.
And it's a good start to the day. Someone told me that you have really 3 things of value: your knowledge, your time, and your money.
Yep.
And when you're trying to solve one, use the other 2.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So as we bring this home to kind of how it affects on us as individuals, we talk about branding for corporates, but that's in a way the brand for the individual is your reputation, how you're perceived. And you can control a lot of that with how you carry yourself, how you present yourself. Tie some of this together as to the lessons that you've learned with your many years of corporate branding. And you just talked about that on like your faith and how you take steps, but expand on that as to other things you've learned that I, as an individual, if I'm wanting my personal brand, the Grant brand, to really take off and be what I want it to be, what should I be thinking about?
Well, I think 2 things. From a professional standpoint, figure out what it is that you can do for other people. I had an opportunity many years ago to go to a cocktail party, and this coach was like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "I help people find better pour decisions." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "I'm in the wine business, but that's functional. That's what I do. But really what I love to do is educate people so that when they go out to a restaurant and the wine list is handed to them, that they have enough confidence and competence to be able to say, Sally's having chicken and Bob's having steak. I'm going to pick out a couple wines for the table. Maybe we'll start with some champagne because we're celebrating someone's birthday." And people go, "Yeah, that's what Eric does." Right? So having that confidence, that personal brag. The example that I used most recently was someone was telling me that they were selling homes and they were the finance director. I'm like, "Well, that sounds good." I said, "But what do you really do?" And I said, "Let me tell you, and I'll give you this for the next conversation. You help people find homes to celebrate family holidays. One is functional, the other is emotional."
I've heard you talk about a remarkable point of difference and how a lot of these great brands, you try to distinguish yourself from others. And it seems like that's what we as individuals are striving to do too. How do you make yourself different, but in a remarkable sort of way?
Well, I mean, the big thing is have the confidence and competence to be able to have an opinion, and have an opinion that's safe, that's fair, that's non-discriminatory, and you get people to respond to that. We had brunch with my 2 bonus sons yesterday, and we were talking about something. And I said, "Andrew, why did you ask that?" He goes, "You're always giving me something to think about when I leave here." So to me, that's kind of like a teachable point of view. Right? I didn't tell him what to think, but I gave him enough fodder to go.
But in a way, you've added value to his life because
value.
it's
added value. When I first moved to Texas and I got involved in a startup container store, we had an advisor who said, I'll quote, "Taste your words before you spit them out." And I've written that down. I've used it now for years.
All right, for the dumb people like me, add something to that. It'll help me understand how that relates.
Don't just throw something in the universe that either you don't believe in, that it was just kind of a fly-by-night comment, that you heard it 20 minutes ago and you really haven't digested it, or something, and it happens often in businesses, oh, that was funny. Well, it may have not been funny to the 4 people that perhaps were offended in the room,
Sure.
around the table. And so we have to be cognizant of how words impact other people. And sometimes staying silent and digesting those funny words is probably the best professional or personal guardrail that you can have.
I went to a business school that was class discussion, case study method, and we had an award we would give internally called the Chip Shot Award. And it was for the individual that would jump into the conversation and do a chip shot that would barely move the ball along, not really add any value, but by God, he wanted to say something. And that, I always remember that, because like, is what you're saying really adding value? Is it really moving the conversation, the project further along?
And I don't mean to age us, but you're talking about something that happened so long ago, right? That remains in your psyche.
It does.
And so those are the things that we have to be respectful of, that either the professor allowed that to happen in that context, or the leader of a kind of a discussion around the table, business or personal, didn't set up kind of ground rules. And one of the things I love about sports and about coaching and about mentoring is that there are certain ground rules. And as long as people understand that going into it, I think we can behave in a manner that is productive and healthy and encouraging other growth. And contrast that to those situations where someone at the end of the table is overserved and starts saying things or doing things that make everyone else feel uncomfortable. And so that, as a professional, as a mentor, as a coach, is the things that I try and teach is taste your words before you spit them out.
Eric, I think that's a wonderful ending of this. Thank you so much. This is as interesting of a conversation as I expected it to be, and that you're able to bring such vivid examples from brands that we all know here in the Dallas and within America. It I think really makes it come to life even more. So thank you, Eric. Appreciate that.
My pleasure.
So let's clear the table real quick. What you've just heard is a conversation on branding with a focus on corporate, but you see the similarities to what you can do to create a brand, maintain a brand, destroy a brand, and how that also affects you as an individual and your reputation. There's so many decisions that we can make that will affect how you are perceived in the world. The same way that Tylenol brand of others are also perceived in the world, and how quickly that can go into the ditch if you're not careful. You throw in social media, you throw in what's going on in this world, and your personal reputation, your personal brand is at danger every time you say something out there in Twitter or in other places. So learn how your brand is created, learn how you can maintain your brand, and I think what you'll end up seeing is a life that is more fulfilled going forward. So with that, thanks for participating in the Grown Up Table, and look forward to seeing you again. Thanks.